21 Grams is back, and welcome to the third iteration of our show. And in this iteration, we are offering a one-on-one interview with indie artists, and we're going to examine three very specific aspects of the creative soul. The cerebral, which will be all about the chess moves and deep thoughts that go into the aspects of the work and creating the work. The emotional, which will be all about the investment the artist has made in the work and creating it. And the practical, which will all be about the application of common practices, tropes, and ideas. That being said, I'm your host, Joe Compton. Here now. Let's get deep into it. Is a new episode of 21 Grams.
Yeah, okay, so the intro had a little problem, but no worries. Hey, everybody, welcome to 21 Grams. I'm your host, Joe Compton, and I'm joined by the amazing Lindsey Kinsella. Lindsey, tell everybody a little bit about yourself so that we can get started to talking.
Hi, guys. My name is Lindsey Kinsella. I am a science fiction author. And as you can tell from my very poor English, I am hailing from Scotland. It is my first language. We just mangle it. That's what we do. Thanks for having me on, Joe.
Are you one of those Scots that when you get drunk or you start drinking that you get even more impossible to understand?
Probably.
I don't know if you've ever seen that joke by Robin Williams, but Robin Williams talks about that, or like he was talking to a guy in a bar, like from Scotland, and the guy was so drunk he couldn't even make out one word.
Sometimes I don't think the alcohol has anything to do with it. It's just really
Well, I'm super glad that you're here, my friend. And thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate it. Something that struck me when I was looking you up and thinking about what I was going to talk to you about, you have many interests, and many of them have led to the road of writing in certain respects. But I'm kind of curious, research-wise, we'll talk a little bit about one of your interests, but one of your interests that struck me was your love for old cars and restoring cars and pristine racing cars and you could talk about your pride and joy a little bit if you'd like, but if you still have it. I don't know, that interview might have been a while ago that I read, but I'm curious what that has taught you that has helped you with your writing.
That's a very good question, actually. In terms of whether I still have it, yes, I do. I have a little yellow MGB, which is my pride and joy. That's my baby.
What year?
What's that?
What year is it?
It's a 1980. It's quite a late year, but it was one of those cars that they built in when was it released? 1959, I think was the first year, and they effectively never changed it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great little car. I bought that almost 2 years ago now. It didn't run. It sat in a garage for, I think, 3 years. It didn't start. So I spent like a year fixing it up. It now runs and drives. It needs a little aesthetic work. But yes, I'm very proud of that little car. It's it's good fun. I think it's sort of, I am an engineer by trade as well, so there's a lot of sort of technical background when it comes to writing, particularly in sci-fi, which I think comes to me quite easily because of both of those backgrounds. So from an engineering perspective, I have a lot of that sort of theoretical mechanical knowledge. But then from spending years, fixing up old cars, you have that sort of practical knowledge as well, and it does it makes writing, sort of, fictional technology that little bit easier. You just have that little bit of an insight into it. So yeah, I think that's quite interesting. One of the other things that I do, just because I've always been a big car nut, is I started up a little business which organises car shows. We organise events.
Oh, cool.
And I think, while not maybe specific on the writing, that really helped from a marketing perspective, because that's something that I've had to do for years. So yeah, I think things like particularly like using social media, Facebook in particular, as a platform to market, that was a skill I had sort of already mastered before I even decided to start writing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and you can tell me I'm wrong here, but I find that with car enthusiasts, one of the things that it's about is the tedious nature of putting every little design, every little plug in the right place, every wire in the right place, making sure that the engine purrs, a certain way, and those things. So in doing so, you are fighting to complete this project, right? You start something, you're definitely going to finish it. Do you feel like that mentality has carried over into your writing a bit? Do you feel like, because one of the hardest things for younger writers and early writers to get over is that humdrum moment when you're just at a point where you're tired of editing it, you're tired of writing, and you just want to be done. And it's the separation of pushing through that changes everything for a writer, because that when they turn into that moment and go for it and just get to the end, that's a difference maker. So I imagine you've had that experience with cars. Do you feel like that's happened for you in your writing?
Yeah, it's strange. Until right now, I had never made that connection. But yeah, absolutely. I think that there is a sort of mentality that you have to learn, because I think you use the word fight or battle. It really is. They fight you sometimes. They really do. That little MG I talk about, that took me, a year to get that roadworthy. And yeah, it's sometimes there are moments where it can be quite disheartening. You think you've fixed it, and then there's something else, and then you think you fixed it, and there's something else, and all you've done is you fixed one problem, and that's just revealed a hidden one. And I suppose that there are similarities between that and that sort of. I always find I get a sort of mid-writing project kind of stumbling block where I get a little bit stuck. I've written out the sort of basis of the story, and I get stuck on some plot holes or on some twists that don't quite tie in properly. So there's that sort of similar push to get past that. But I think it's the same with both, is that once you've done it once, it's a lot easier to do it again, because you know that you can, you know that it's doable. But that first time around, just staring at a broken car which still won't run, or just staring at a draft that's still not right, it's a similar mental block that you have to push through.
Yeah, I also, something about that. You can't do this with a car, or you can do this with a book, which is at some point you just got to let it go and trust the process and keep going. But with a car, if you do that, you're never going to get it to work. It's never going to run. And that's the whole goal, is to get it to run so you can take it out and show it off and all that thing, which there is a similarity in that as well, I would assume, with the writing. But you do have to complete you have to at some point let it go. And that's a tough thing for a young writer too to learn. Do you feel like there was a point for you that you had to finally just say, okay, I've got to let this go and let it be what it's going to be?
Yes, and I think that's one of the hardest parts. I think is deciding on what's the point that it's ready. Because like you say, if with something like a car, or with sort of most kind of projects that you might do in life, there is a very clear finish point. You know when you're finished.
Yeah.
I I don't know if it's similar over in the States, but over here we have what's called an MOT, which is where you take a car to a garage and they look it over and they tell you if it's roadworthy, you know. So for me on that,
yeah, we have a similar process, especially in California with emissions and everything like that. So.
Yeah, it's a bit more lax over here with classic cars. We get away with some stuff, but you know. But you know, so there was that very clear point, you know, at least from a mechanical perspective. I could still make it look nicer, but from a mechanical point of view, when I took it to that garage and I got that certificate that says, yeah, this is legal, you can put this on the road. It's a very clear finish point. How do you decide when your manuscript's ready?
Yeah.
And yeah, it took me a long time to get to that stage where I thought it was ready. And you know, even when it's at the point where, you know, it's been through an editor and it's been through beta readers, you know, you're still thinking, is it ready though? And yeah, you do have to at some point just bite the bullet and put it out there and accept that yes, it could always be better, but it could always take 20 years if you let it, you know. So yeah, that's tricky. I still don't think I've got a handle on that, on figuring out when it's done.
I've been writing for 15 years and I still don't have a handle on it, so don't feel so bad. It's not. It's a tough thing. I mean, certain projects, you get to a point where certain projects you do feel like you know when they're done and everything like that. But oftentimes, if you're writing, and I'm a pantser, so I write from discovery on, and so that's even worse, because then how do I even know that I'm done? My brain keeps going after that. So you know, and you're establishing a series with this book, right? This is going to be an open-ended series for you, or do you have a sure-minded goal, or is this a standalone?
So sort of a little bit of both in a sense. I wanted it to be able to stand on its own, but I did also set it up so that there was, you know, sort of room for a series, and I do plan on a follow-up book. That might be the next one I write. It might be the one after that. I haven't quite decided yet. It depends on. I'm sure you know yourself. There are times when you have so many ideas, and sometimes the hardest thing is when you finish one project, deciding which is going to be your next.
Yeah.
Particularly as I have quite a sort of long process. It takes me about a year to get a book out, so that's quite an important decision. You know, which one am I going to do next? But yeah, I didn't want to get sucked into a series too much. I didn't want to just sit down and write book after book in the same series, because I wanted to kind of stretch my legs and write something different and explore some different genres and some different concepts. And then, you know, in a few years, circle back round and come back to that series and add something new to it. So yeah, a little bit of both. It does stand on its own. It's a self-contained story, but with room to explore that world a little bit more.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, something else that I found fascinating in researching for this interview was your love of twists and turns, and which again, you know, brings you to the car analogy a little bit. You know, the road that we love to travel on twists and turns, right? And that's, you know, go up in the mountains and, you know, see what this baby really can do. But twists and turns are a little different in writing. And where did that love come from? Where do you feel like why that is so important to you?
I don't know. I've always been. I think growing up, I was always a bit of a movie buff as well. So I think, you know, I was a reader too, but I think in many ways I was even more of a movie buff than I was as a reader. And I think really that's in part where that sort of love of storytelling came from. And yeah, my favorite stories were always ones that would hit you with a plot twist that you never saw coming. You know, I remember being young and I know that he hasn't done some great things since then, but M. Night Shyamalan was, you know, those first three movies that he came out with, and everyone just sucker punched you at some point with something that just blew your mind. You know, I always sort of aspired towards that a little. Not quite with the same. I think Shyamalan's structure has become a little bit cliched because he's made it so famous.
Right.
I like that sort of idea of really trying to be sort of not too clever with it, but you have to throw in a twist that's unexpected, but you have to also lay the groundwork for it. It can't just completely come out of the blue. You know, it has to be a twist where the reader goes, "Oh yeah," you know, rather than just, where did that come from? You know, so it's quite difficult to write that kind of story, I think, and I think maybe that's why it took so long to write the Lazarus Taxa, because it did have to. I had to lay the groundwork without giving it away. But you know, it's a tricky balance.
Were you looking back at plot points and things of that nature to kind of make sure that you covered all the bases, you know, that you left all the crumbs that you wanted to leave and everything like that, or did you feel like it was just a natural flow at some point?
I definitely doubled back on quite a number of things, because you know, there were a number of times where I'd sort of have a plot development, and I would think to myself, you know, has anything previously in the book, you know, really set this up? Has anything before hinted that this is a possibility? And if the answer was no, then I felt the need to sort of go back and drop something, and even if it was just sort of subtle hints, because I think a big old twist that just comes out of nowhere can feel sort of cheap or lazy. You know, there has to be groundwork, and it has to be something that makes sense to the reader, something that they maybe hadn't considered consciously, but they knew was a possibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Hello, Anita. Nice to see you. It's disingenuous a little bit. You know, who are you tricking really at that point? Are you tricking yourself, or are you tricking the audience? And if you're trying to trick the audience, you're doing it right. If you're trying to trick yourself, then you're really then kind of, you're stuck in the mud a little bit. You know, there's just, and the reader can sense that right away. I mean, they'll pick that up right away. I mean, the interesting thing for me about M. Night Shyamalan is I read the screenplay to Sixth Sense before I saw the movie, because I didn't know that there was going to be this massive twist, and I was so blown away by reading it that actually made me go see the movie. And it got spoiled for me, but it was so well done, and the crumbs, like literally. The one thing about that you want to do as a twist writer, right, is to make people go back and try and figure it out, right? That's when you know you've got it right.
Exactly, and that's I think that's kind of what I wanted to make sure that I do. I wanted to make sure that if you read it again, you would then pick up on a lot of points, and you would be like, "Oh yeah, I know why that's there now." I found that was quite interesting to do. I think that the danger though is, without wanting to sound sort of patronising, not there's a spectrum of intelligence of readers, so you have to sort of spell it out a little so that everyone gets it, but there are always going to be some people that catch on before they should.
And or don't get it at all, which is even worse.
Yeah, true. But I have had a number of it was just one actually. I had one reviewer who was like, "Yeah, I figured this out halfway through the book," and maybe they're lying. But I was like, "Oh." But that's the pitfall, I suppose, because you have to set up these plot twists and these revelations. You can't just drop them in out the blue. So yeah, you do run the risk that a reader might have figured it out before their time.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, the other thing that you're very interested in, you kind of pay homage to and tribute in your book, and you name a character after Dian Fossey, and you're big into paleontology and that aspect, and talk a little bit about what was it about Dian Fossey that you really admire and thought of that you really needed to do that for your book.
I think that's always, it's obviously, I know she's, you know, a real person, but it was always a sort of interesting story as well. I thought, and sometimes I think the most interesting stories do come from real life. And she's a figure who I've always sort of admired. You know, she was someone who had a cause and was really dedicated to that cause to the point where, you know, it got her killed. So, you know, she made the sort of ultimate sacrifice for what she believed in. So yeah, she's always someone who I massively respected. And I think when the opportunity came, when I started writing this character, I didn't have a name for her at first. And one of her sort of primary sort of characteristics is that she really, you know, believed that, you know, the animals in this set up, it's a time travel premise. The main characters end up in the late Cretaceous, and she very much believes that, you know, these animals need to be treated with respect and with care. So she sort of became almost a kind of conservationist type character, and I thought that became the perfect opportunity to throw a bit of a tribute, I suppose, towards someone who I've always really admired. And yeah, I mean, maybe I'll for anyone who doesn't know, have them, you know, kind of look up her story, because Dian Fossey's story is it's amazing and it's inspirational, but it's really heartbreaking as well.
It is really heartbreaking. And anybody who hasn't seen Gorillas in the Mist or read Gorillas in the Mist, you should definitely check both of those out. The book is even more detailed than the movie, so it's very interesting. But Sigourney Weaver does an excellent job in that movie, capturing her essence. You know, and I've seen the videos of Dian Fossey doing her thing, and it's uncanny how much Sigourney Weaver really channels her in that movie. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely worth checking out. It's quite sort of. It's always hard to say something's especially faithful because you don't know how much is fiction on these movies. But what it does is it captures the sort of essence. You know, it captures the character well. It's respectful, and it's excellent. The book and the movie.
How important is that for you, capturing essence of characters? Do you feel like that's everything in your stories, or do you feel like it's a flavor that helps, you know, sprinkle into the story? What is your idea of character and creating that essence for them?
That's a very kind of deep, interesting question. I think it depends on the character to an extent. I think that some you need a lot more insight than others, depending on what kind of role they play. I like to sort of develop characters through their interactions with each other where I can, because I think that sometimes that's the most interesting way to play out, you know, because I think that quite often that's when people are pushed either to the best or the worst of themselves. You know, if there's a really kind of strong positive relationship, then you can really bring out the best in a character's personalities. But equally, where there's conflict, you can bring out the worst in them, and you can show under these sort of stressful situations, you know, what each character's what they're really about, what they're like underneath. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting ways to bring that out. I always think it's tricky. One of the trickiest parts of character development is how you really get across to the reader who they are, but without doing, you know, huge amounts of info dumps. I think it's easy to just have a big backstory and think that that's character development. And yeah, I found particularly in early drafts, I'd have, you know, huge amounts of backstory, in the book, and then me sitting thinking it's very long-winded. I need to find different ways to demonstrate who this character is. That's tricky. That's a tricky thing to do, I think. But yeah, I find that the best way to bring out someone's got, just have them have a fight with another character, not necessarily a physical fight, but just have them have a disagreement, and that really you can paint quite a rich picture of a character's motivations through that kind of situation.
How much are you finding you sprinkle yourself into a lot of these characters? Is there a few characters in there that you would say resonate as you more than others?
Yeah, I think I had to try and dial that back a little. There's the old self-insertion writer's trap.
Yeah,
I think in early drafts of the Lazarus Taxa, I very much fell into without even really realizing. So yeah, the main character Sid, he was very much a sort of self-insertion in early drafts, and I thankfully realized that kind of halfway through the process, and I thought, I have to go back and take some of me out of that. That's too much. Yeah, I basically just had to go back and
that's cool. You recognized it.
Well, I think I was sort of reading an article. I was maybe in a second draft or something at the time, and this was my first ever book. I was kind of going blind. I didn't really know what I was doing. That suggests that I do now. I don't know, but yeah, I read a sort of article on self-insertion writing, and I was sitting there like, oops. And I think it's easy done, particularly for a new writer, because it's so much easier to picture what you think you would do in that situation than it is to picture what a character you've made up in your head would do. But really, when it came down to it, I just had to go back and all the people that I had done that with, one in particular, I just had to make them worse people, which you can make a better character by making them a worse person. It's a sort of strange contradiction, but yeah, I think that's the problem with that sort of self-insertion, is that you end up writing a character with no flaws, because mentally we don't like to recognize our own flaws.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just have to make sure that they're still likable if you want them to be likable, but they can't be perfect because people don't relate to that.
Now, all that being said, your main character is a Scottish lad, right? Correct?
Yes, there is some similarities, but I liked to sort of keep that in. There's a little bit of me in there, just left in terms of.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but with that, but that's fine. But I was more interested in the idea of it being an authentic Scot, because there's words we were just talking about, there's words that defy the English language in Scottish, and I'm curious, when you're thinking of those, because you know them and you know how they are pronounced, you know how they run. Are you very careful about slang and putting the right element to you mentioned earlier about twists and having to cater to all audiences, because like if you read like a Roddy Doyle book, or something to that effect, where it's just unbelievably layered with slang, and a lot of people have a hard time. Or Irving Welsh is another one. I mean, I know a lot of people who hated Train Spotting just because they couldn't get through it because of all the slang. And so I'm curious if those are lessons that you've learned, and what your approach was to that element of your book, knowing that he was going to be a Scottish lad.
Yeah, I tried to shy away from the sort of slang as much as possible. I was very conscious of the fact that I mean, I started building up a sort of marketing following long before the book was finished. I mean, effectively, when I started writing the book, I started marketing. So I quite quickly realised that the majority of my audience was in the States. So I knew from very early on that, I couldn't just layer this up with a thick Scotch accent. But I also, not just for the sake of the reader being able to understand, but also I think sometimes, particularly with Scottish characters, actually, they can come across as somewhat of a caricature.
Yeah.
And any sort of fiction, but I think books in particular can really come across that way. But particularly as, I don't think when Scots speak to each other, there is a lot of slang in there.
Yeah.
We are conscious of it, and we do know that when we're speaking to someone who isn't Scottish, who all of the other characters in the book aren't, we don't speak like that because we know that you can't understand. And we're sort of almost, I hesitate to say, but we're sort of almost bilingual. Like Scots is derived from English. But the link is tenuous now, if we're being honest. So yeah, we do switch between the two. So I didn't see the need to sort of layer this up with Scottish slang, particularly as Sid the character. Yes, he's Scottish, but he's sort of worldly, he's sort of well-travelled. So he's the kind of guy who's going to be well-versed in speaking proper English, So yeah, I think there's the odd Scots word thrown in there somewhere. Ones that I thought people would understand, instead of little, they'll maybe say wee every now and then, but it's not laid on thick at all.
A couple mates in there and a couple lads in there, and that kind of idea.
A little bit like that, and there's sort of a little bit of a clash between sort of British and American English as well, because obviously Sid being a Scot and Diane in the book is American, so there's that sort of that was quite a nice way to just have a little bit of friendly banter between two characters who have a very sort of positive relationship in the book. So that was just a nice way to show that they're very different, and they are in terms of personalities as well. But yeah, they still really connect.
Did the science fiction aspect of it help that too? Do you feel like because you were going otherworldly and it is science fiction that you were going to be able to stretch that a little bit further because it is in the future ish kind of thing?
Possibly. I think I tried to go for quite a grounded science fiction on this point. So it's sort of it's not set in the future. It's set in the present day, and it's while the concept in some ways of time travel back to say the dinosaurs, that seems quite.
Yeah, I didn't want to spoil it for people. So that's why I said future-ish.
That's sort of the premise of the book rather than any sort of twist. So I think that's okay. But I tried to keep it quite grounded. It doesn't feel like a sort of fantasy world. It's not sort of hardcore science fiction. It's a very kind of grounded, almost gritty in places kind of book. So it very much feels like the real world and real people. So no, kind of the opposite. I think I very much went for realism and how a lot of those characters kind of spoke and behaved and interacted.
So we crossed the threshold of your other love, which is paleontology, and I'm curious. I know you're not technically a paleontologist. I don't know if you went to school for it or anything like that. I think you have an engineering degree, correct? But
I do. Yeah, I studied engineering.
So, but I do consider you quite an expert because I feel like you are the kind of guy that would go full throttle into something if you're really a love for it. So I love having these expert opinions like this on here, especially on this show. The idea, what do you think what frustrates you the most when you read a book that has bones or something that is being discovered? Where do you think that writers get it wrong more times than they get it right?
I think a lot of times where authors get it wrong, but whether it's in terms of the sort of science aspect of paleontology or just sort of bringing to life any sort of prehistoric animal, like dinosaurs in particular, is I hasten to use the word lazy, but they can be lazy. And so often you see things which are just a sort of rehash of something like a Jurassic Park movie, which when we look at Jurassic Park in isolation, I don't want to look like I'm sort of a lot of paleontology people look like they're just always bashing Jurassic Park because it was inaccurate.
Right.
For the time, it was actually pretty good. Michael Crichton put a lot of research into Jurassic Park.
And the book is a lot more brutal and a lot more detailed than the movie is.
It certainly is. It certainly is. But certainly from that sort of paleontology perspective, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
But it was also 1992.
Yeah.
Feel old saying it, but that was 30. Fuck me, that was 30 years ago.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I said a sweary word. Is that okay?
That's all right. Yeah, you're fine. Don't worry about it. You're good.
And yeah, paleontology is such a fast-moving science. 30 years is a lifetime.
Yeah.
So I'm not criticizing Jurassic Park in any way. I actually really respect how much effort Michael Crichton put into making that book up to date at the time. It was a revelation at the time. This was a time when dinosaurs were still depicted as being sort of big lumbering lizards dragging their tail around in movies. So, but it was 30 years ago, and I think writers today, and this is true for authors and for script writers for movies and TV shows, they can be very guilty of using that one piece of science fiction and not actual science as the basis for the science fiction. So yeah, you see lots of kind of lazy tropes these days, and that's where it gets frustrating. It's not necessarily frustrating that it's wrong. It's that it's wrong in exactly the same way that everything else is. So yeah, it's the difference between handing in homework that's wrong and handing in homework that's wrong but exactly the same as the person who sits beside you. Get it wrong. I don't care if you get it wrong, but make your own mistakes.
What is it about paleontology that caught your eye? What have you? Is it bones? What is it? History? What is it about paleontology that really made you, want to get involved in it and look at it?
I think it stems from a very young age to the point where I couldn't even tell you exactly where it started. But I've always been sort of just fascinated by the notion that using a really wide range of scientific methods, that you can sort of take what is effectively a rock. It used to be a bone. It's now a rock. It doesn't have any organic material left in it, and from this rock you can piece together not just an animal but an ecosystem and a world that existed tens, hundreds of millions of years ago. That's always, even now, even to this day, in fact, possibly more so the more I know about it. Just absolutely blows my mind. And I think I've always thought that needs to be something, or it should be something that blows everyone else's minds too. And I think that was one of my kind of main motivations to write the book in the first place. Is I thought, that this is amazing. More people should know about this. Maybe I should put it out there, and so I wanted to sort of bring that to people.
Nice. That's awesome. It's funny because I'm sitting here thinking about, you mentioned how young you were, and my love of film started with Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I just think to myself, I never wanted to be Indiana Jones. I wanted to be Steven Spielberg. And it's just a weird idea that that movie, which I love, it's one of my all-time favorites, and I loved everything about it and everything in it, but never crossed my mind that I'd ever want to be in the same dirt as Indiana was. I wanted to be in the same dirt as Steven Spielberg was. That's kind of funny how we kind of gravitate to things like that.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think Indiana Jones was ever a good example of an archaeologist.
Yeah. No, but
it kind of just sort of destroys a lot of really old, valuable art.
But there are a lot of archaeologists that saw that movie and wanted to be that because of that movie. So,
absolutely. And I think the same could be said for something like Jurassic Park. How many paleontologists around today were inspired to do so by either the book or the movie? And I think in another life I could have went down that road myself. As you mentioned, I'm not a professional at all. I didn't study paleontology. I'm more sort of a hardcore geek.
You didn't want to get your nails dirty. You wanted to be the guy that gives them the formula to get the guys the nails dirty, right?
Yeah, well, I suppose so. I kind of I don't know. I would have loved to have went down that road. It's a very niche road to go down.
Yeah, and it's a tough life. It's a tough life. That's not a glamorous job.
I don't think I ever had any sort of issues with sort of getting my hands dirty. I mean, obviously we spoke about cars and stuff earlier.
Well, I don't mean it in that respect. I mean it in like pay and jobs and things of that nature. That's what I meant. But yeah.
I think there's the relocation as well. There's not a lot of local paleontology. You have
unless you go to the Scottish pub and dig the ground underneath it. But yeah.
It's not to say that there are no fossil beds in Scotland. There are.
Right. Yeah.
But you can't just nip down the road and go grab some fossils. But I think what a lot of people, and to an extent, what's always fascinated me more about paleontology, a lot of people think about it as the digging up the bones. They think about the chiseling away the rock. There's a dinosaur. I've always found the more interesting part of paleontology actually comes after that. Finding a fossil, amazing. Yeah.
But what was it for?
Yes, it's how you can take that back and analyze that to find out, what was it? How is it related to other animals? How did it live? The fact that they can, scientists can do sort of microscopic analysis and they can figure out from isotopes left in the rock what it ate. They can figure out from microscopic structures in the skin or in the feathers what color it was. The color's gone. The color's been gone for tens of millions of years. But they can figure out what it was based on microscopic structures. That's what's always fascinated me more than, digging up a bone. It's how you can take that and find out such a wealth of information that's sort of hidden inside it.
Yeah, Maddie says it's so true, Lindsay. That's when the fun starts. What was that thing? Yeah. And I just want to answer this question real quickly. It's not daylight. That's a light over my head. So it's a bright light. So anyway, it is dark here. It is very dark. It's almost light where Lindsay is, though.
It's currently 3:45 in the morning.
Yeah, I do. Finding what it is and figuring that out is really interesting, and it goes along with your puzzle aspect and your twists and things like that. So there's all kind of kismet with you, and the way you write. Do you feel is that comfort for you then, because you're taking what you love and kind of putting it all together into a puzzle? Is that kind of how you look at it?
It is, yeah. I think a lot of that sort of subconscious, actually. I don't think I sort of intentionally put it together that way, but
Sure.
yeah, certainly that sort of, having that information buried in there somewhere and pulling it out through a story. Yeah, it's a similar sort of process, having that revelation. So yeah, and I think there are sort of some parallels between the science of paleontology and how I presented the story. So yeah, I feel like you're shrinking me. I didn't realize these things about myself.
Well, it is. Hey, this is the show, man. We're getting to the soul of the writer here. This is why I like this show and doing this show, because I love getting into it, because I find it fascinating what motivates people to do these things, and how everything they do comes full circle in that respect, because that's who we are. That's human nature in a lot of respects. I mean, you wrote this book during the pandemic, and you finally sat down, as you put it. You had the time to finally do this, and you decided to spend it doing this. Was it burning a hole in you, or was it calling you quite a bit, or was it just something that you've always wanted to do, and you said, you know what, I'm going to try it?
I think that sort of burning a hole analogy is a good one, actually. I think there was always something sort of just beneath the skin, this sort of creativity that was desperate for a way out. And I didn't really always have the time to let that out, or even really know how to let that out. Not want to say it was a bad or a good thing, the pandemic. It wasn't. It was a terrible thing, and many people died. But in that sort of every cloud aspect, it I had suddenly free time that I didn't have before. And yeah, it was almost like a little sort of light bulb moment, sitting in the house one day, not allowed to leave, thinking, "Oh, I could write a book," and I didn't really expect it to go anywhere, if I'm honest.
Yeah. So did you come up with a game plan then? Or was it just spur of the moment? Did you kind of figure out, I'm going to write? Were you one of those writers that wrote something a little every day? Had a word count? Were you just writing when you felt like writing? Because I mean, the pandemic also played a lot of mind tricks on all of us and kind of screwed us all up, and we got cabin fever and all those wonderful things that came along with it. That other than we're very fortunate to be here, and like you said, a lot of people lost their lives, and it was a terrible ordeal. But I'm just kind of curious how your process went to get this book done, because you finished it. So
yeah, my process was very much ad hoc. I wrote partly when I had the time to write. Obviously at that point in time I had more time to write than I perhaps do too, but also when I had the sort of energy or the motivation or the inspiration to write. I don't find that setting out that sort of target for a number of words tends to work for me, because I'll quite often think if I try and force it and sit down at a certain time of the day and say, right, you must write 1,000 words, 2,000 words today, I'll kind of just sit and I'll write nonsense, because I'll come back the next day and look at what I wrote when I was in that mood and think, no. So I need to be in the right sort of mindset, and I find that has to sort of come naturally. I can't force that. That's just I'm in the mood when I'm in the mood, and so yeah, it's a very ad hoc process, and it still is to this day. I mean, I write, generally speaking, in the dead of night. I mean, I know kind of we're talking about how it's like 3 a.m. here. quite often I am awake at this time, because this is when I write, because this seems to be when I have. I think it's the sort of peace and quiet, which I mean I have 3 kids, so that's hard to come by. That is when the mindset is right. That's when I can sit down and it'll flow. So yeah, it's just when it feels right.
Maddie says she went on a baking frenzy to cope with all the anxiety. Yeah, a lot of people did a lot of interesting things, myself included. I got divorced, so that's how I coped with it. But within that process, though, were you finding that you were getting inspired often? Was writing those words sparking something for you? Were you getting weird times when you were getting inspired?
Yeah, I find that the inspiration doesn't come to me at all while I'm writing.
Yeah, damn it.
I wish it did. Yeah, no, I can. It tends to be not pre-planned, but the inspiration comes beforehand. And I have a terrible memory, so I have to. At very awkward moments, I have to, whip out my phone and take down some notes so I don't forget. It's always well doing sort of menial tasks. The inspiration will strike when I'm washing dishes or having a shower or cleaning
Now
up.
he says it's dad brain.
I've had dad brain for about a decade now. So. But yeah, I find that it comes out of the blue. Usually when my brain's sort of not switched off, but when I'm not focused on something and my mind's allowed to wander. But yeah, I have to very quickly write these things down, or they'll be gone, lost in the ether forever. I have gotten up in the middle of the night in the past to go and do some writing. I've woken up at like 1 a.m. and been like, oh, I have an idea. Got enough to go and write.
I can relate. Yeah, that's fun. I'm curious, as we wrap up here and get closer to the end. I'm kind of curious now that you've been on this journey. You've obviously got the bug. You're going to write some more. You're going to keep going. So, what did you pick up from this first experience that you're taking into the next book, whatever that might be? And what is it? Did you figure out something that you are going to utilize for the next time you sit down and write a book?
Yeah, and it's hard to say even one thing, to be honest. I think that when you write your first book, you learn so much. Because it's such a long process and such a complex process. You pick up a lot. I think for me the big thing that came out of it was my sort of writing process. So obviously you mentioned that you're somewhat of a pantser. My sort of early drafts anyway of the Lazarus Taxa were very much written like that. I say I made it up as I go along. I know that's kind of just what writing is, but you know what I mean. I didn't really plan it out.
Yeah.
That didn't really work all that well for me, particularly as how I like to write sort of.
Gee, big surprise that the prior proper planning didn't happen for the engineer. That's a big surprise.
You would think that, but that happens more in engineering than you would.
Yeah, probably. You're probably right about that. That's probably a misconception that I'm perpetuating a stereotype that probably is not true. But yeah.
But yeah, certainly I find, particularly, as we're spoken, I like to write a story that has sort of, twists and turns, and that's difficult to do authentically by panting it. You can do it, but Christ, the redrafts are painful.
Yeah.
You have to completely change aspects of the story because you didn't realize that you were going to do a certain twist at the time you were writing the beginning of the book.
Did I just kill that character? For fuck's sake! What am I thinking? Right?
So I think with my current book, I've planned it out a lot more, not necessarily in any sort of meticulous detail,
Mm-hmm.
but just in terms of the overarching plot. I started writing this book knowing broadly where I was going with it. I knew broadly how it was going to end. I knew how it was going to twist and turn. And so even in the early drafts, I didn't have to go back and leave that, the trail of cookie crumbs, as you put it. I could write that in first time around. And I think that's pretty much half the time it's taken me to write this book. Maybe even less. We factor in the fact that I have less free time now. It took me 2 years to write the Lazarus Taxa. Touch wood, I don't want to jinx it, but I think it'll be about a year to get this one out. And that's about a year with a lot less free time than I had for the first one, because it was COVID. And I didn't have a baby, which, so yes.
Which almost prevented you from being here on time, we should mention.
It did 15 minutes before setting us up. He decided he wanted a bottle. So,
as they do.
But yeah, that sort of sums up how I write as well. It's when I can. I have to work it around everything else that's going on, because it's busy. There's a lot. I mentioned I'm an engineer. I do cars, I do events, and I've got 3 kids. So yeah, you have to work it in when you can. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you worked in this conversation. I know that it's super early for you, and I really do appreciate it. And I don't know if you're a soccer fan, but I'm sure there's a premier game that's going to be happening pretty soon. So at least you're up for that. But
I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but my son is. He's football mad. So
so he's going to be up pretty soon, I would imagine. But yeah, I mean, this was awesome to get to sit down and talk to you one-on-one. You're a fascinating bloke, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this. And yeah, as Maddie said, I'm so glad you got pulled into our world. We're really happy that you're here. And yeah, so before we go, tell everybody a little bit about where they can find your book, and if you want to, give a little bit about the book, because we touched on it, but I think you probably have a better sense of how to market it than I do. So give everybody a little taste of what the book's about, and where they can find it, and where they can find you.
Yeah. Well, firstly, massive thank you for having me on. This has been great, and the GoIndieNow stuff in general it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. So thank you, not just for this show, but in general. It's really good to be part of it. A little bit about the book. So that the Lazarus Taxa is effectively about the first ever scientific expedition through time, and the idea is that it's this sort of new fledgling technology. It's not very good. It's clunky. There are issues. It takes 6 months between time jumps, so you can't just use time travel willy-nilly. And it's about how this field team, stuck 6 months in the late Cretaceous, how they cope with their scientific expedition, and not just with, the local wildlife, if you like, but how they cope with each other, and how they have to rely on each other and trust one another, and then also, whether they can trust one another. Not too many hints, though. Don't want to give anything away. It's an interesting book. It's twists and turns, and I like to think that you don't really know what's coming next. And yeah, if you want to check the book out, it's on Amazon, it's on Google Play and Barnes and Noble. And yeah, you can follow me on social media. I predominantly use Facebook. That's my main platform. Lindsey Kinsella, the Lazarus Taxa is my page. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, although I'm rubbish at those platforms and I haven't really figured out how they work yet. But I'm on there.
Awesome.
That's me. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here, my friend. Thank you to the audience and everybody who came and gave us comments and talked. And remember, that's always time to go indie now, and we'll be back again soon with another 21 grams. In fact, Halloween night, I'm going to be spending time with Willie Lucchese, so come and check that out. We've got a bunch of stuff going on as always, new shows and everything dropping. So everybody come, spend some time with us. And yeah, like I said, it's always time to go indie now. And with that, we say good night. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
As I can't get, because I'm on my phone. Live, can't beat it, right? There we go.